Entrepreneurial Edge is brought to you by Business Banking from FNB, because small ideas can lead to big business. FNB, how can we help you?
Now, still in the studio with me, I have Herschel Jawitz, CEO of Jawitz Property. Just to carry on with the theme from the first half, what is the current state of the property market here in Africa's largest economy?
It is holding. And when I mean holding, it's holding from a price point of view. I don't think it's as bad as the press make it out to be. So we're seeing very gradual price growth, and we're seeing some relatively decent demand in certain parts of the country, mainly the major metropolitan areas. Unfortunately, though, your coastal and especially your coastal leisure areas are still under a lot of pressure with just a lot of supply and very little demand.
And what kind of coastal areas are suffering the most here in South Africa? Because I know it's a big talking point with property people.
Yeah. So if you look at your coastal areas like Port Elizabeth, Durban, Cape Town, where it's a mix of commerce and coastal and leisure, they're doing okay. It's your pure leisure areas. So your Knysnas, your Plettenberg Bays, your Port Alfred, some of your cities up and down the north coast of KZN, where there's a significant component of leisure, and there just at the moment are a lot of sellers and not enough buyers.
But you said demand was holding, but I mean, in the suburb of Johannesburg that I live in Northcliffe, there's some houses there, I swear they've been on sale for more than a year, some of them. Every week I go past, I see the signs up. Obviously, a lot of people are struggling to sell what should be reasonably desirable houses. Yeah,
so we say in any market, buyers are buying and sellers are selling. The challenge is meeting of expectations. There is no doubt it is a buyer's market at the moment, and those homes that you're seeing in Northcliffe and in a lot of other suburbs across the country are those sellers who haven't yet, and it is a process, accepted that perhaps the market is not going to pay the price that they want for their home, and that they're going to have to adjust to where the market is. And unfortunately, that adjustment is always down. It's just sometimes a process to get the sellers to realize that, and more importantly, accept it.
But don't you think, though, that after the battering the world economy has taken in the last 3 years, and the property market in this particular neck of the woods in the last couple of years, that kind of philosophy of you get a better job, you get a pay rise, you get promotion, you buy a new house, you get a bit more, you buy a better house, that old-fashioned idea, do you think it's gone out the window a bit?
It's interesting. So, the banks talk about levels of indebtedness at the moment and the pressure that consumers are under, and they are. But the most activity and the highest volume of business and the market that's been least affected is, in fact, the lower end of the market. And so these aren't people who are necessarily sort of buying up, but these are people who are buying up out of necessity. So first-time buyers who are saying there's no better time to buy a house in terms of where price levels are and interest rates are. These are young families who've perhaps got married and started a family and now can't live in a 1 or a 2 bedroom home or an apartment anymore. So there's always going to be a component of people who must buy, who are buying out of necessity. And then there are those people who are buying because they want to buy but don't necessarily have to buy. And I think that's the part of the market in this time period that's being most affected.
But give me an idea of the state of the market at the moment. I mean, your average family 3-bedroom house here in South Africa, percentage-wise, how much cheaper do you think it is this year than maybe as it was before the troubles started in 2008?
Well, I think prices are probably still down in the region of 15 to 20% from where they were at the end of the peak, which was end of 07, beginning of 2008. So there is no doubt this is a great value market. There aren't bargains. But if you take into account where property prices are, and most importantly where interest rates are, the only component that doesn't make this the ultimate time to get into the market is where the banks are, and can you afford the deposits, or do you have the cash for the deposits that they're looking for? But other than that, it's a great buying market.
But one of the great lessons that's come out of this recession that we've had, the banks and the governments, everybody's saying less debt, don't put yourselves in debt no matter what you do. If you're a homeowner, like myself, and maybe there's an attractive property across the road, maybe 20% less than it was, say, 3 years ago, isn't it a great risk to actually get that second home? bearing in mind what's happened in the last 3 years?
Yes, if you're talking about second homes, interesting there again, I don't think people have at the moment a high propensity for second homes, and you spoke about that risk aversion. Are we going to get burnt? Let's stick to what we've got. I think the banks have got even less willingness to lend to people looking for second homes. So if you look at that buy-to-let component of the market, people looking for investment properties to rent out, that graph has just fallen off the back of a cliff over the last few years. So I think there is less propensity for risk. But the irony is, as with the buying market, is from an investment point of view and yields and where rentals are relative to house prices, there can't be a better time to buy than in this market from an investment point of view.
But looking slightly further afield now also you've got interests in the rest of the continent. What sort of hotspots and opportunities are you seeing there in terms of property and investment for that matter?
So we have an office in Gaborone and we have an office in Mauritius. So Botswana is probably a good example. There is a strong corporate component to demand in their housing, plus the local demand. There is always a shortage of housing, and so when you have demand exceeding supply, it's a healthy market. And I think it applies to a lot of markets in Africa, where generally you'd never hear about surpluses of housing. You only hear about shortages right across the price spectrum. So I think the long-term view from a demand and supply point of view, certainly in the rest of Africa, is probably a little healthier than it is here in South Africa, where our housing market is probably a little more developed.
And if you're a property entrepreneur looking out to the rest of the continent, where would you be looking to?
Well, I think you've got to look at what's driving that market. So if you look, for example, to Zimbabwe, the risk is there that economy and that country doesn't turn around, and I'm not sure the underlying fundamentals are there, and that's probably more of a speculative decision versus looking at countries like Botswana, Angola, where there's a lot of reconstruction taking place, and there's an oil-based industry where there are a lot more people coming into those countries perhaps than leaving those countries. So the fundamentals are always sound, whether you're looking to invest in a property locally or you're looking for opportunities into Africa.
And just looking back here into South Africa, I mean, one article you wrote recently which took my eye, you believe that small buyers are being almost trapped by the banks. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, I think that there are probably two components to it. So the first component is, the banks have said, listen, based on what happened a couple of years ago, the days of 100% bonds are not quite gone, but we're being far more prudent. And so first-time buyers, in fact, all buyers are required to put up a slightly bigger deposit. So maybe a 10%, a 15% deposit, sometimes a 5% deposit. And that's probably creating a barrier to entry. So if you look at a first-time buyer looking to buy a home of, let's assume 600,000 or 700,000 rand, needing a 10% deposit, that's 70,000 rand, plus your transfer duties. As a first-time buyer, as a young person or a young couple, you probably need to have about 100,000 rand in hard cash to afford to get into the market, and a lot of young people haven't accumulated that level of money yet. So that's probably the one issue. And the other issue is that the banks have tightened up in terms of their interest rate concessions, and interest rates are still at historic lows. But sometimes you find that the people that can least afford the high interest rates are having to pay those rates just because of their risk and because of the size of the loan. So I'm not sure it's the wrong decision by the banks, but the impact is probably not what certainly we're looking for in the industry.
But on the other side of the coin, I was speaking to someone the other day and said that the bank's repossession system on homes is working overtime. They're flooded and swamped because so many people simply right now can't afford to pay their bonds long term.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of pain in the system, and by that I mean homeowners who are under pressure despite the fact that interest rates have been low. But I think certainly to the bank's credit, I think they've definitely changed their mindset, and I think they've moved from a mindset of repossessing homes to working with homeowners, either to rehabilitate them and keep them in their homes, or encourage them to sell their homes, because it benefits both the bank and the homeowner to try and sell your home on the open market and get a better price and limit your losses before it gets to repossessions. And I think that the retail banks in South Africa have done a particularly good job at the moment, in the last couple of years, of working with homeowners to avoid the repossession route, which is financially devastating and equally so from an emotional point of view.
And looking ahead now, where do you see the property market going here in Africa's largest economy?
Listen, I think they're the prophets of doom that are saying, expect very little real growth. Obviously, I'm in the industry. I'm less pessimistic, or I'm more optimistic. I think we're in for a gradual recovery, though. I think that there's the consumers are under pressure. The global economy is still in turmoil, and I think the part that's going to really impact on our business the most is consumer confidence. Buying a home is a long term. If you're looking at tomorrow, you might buy yourself a compact disc or treat yourself to a dinner. You're not going to buy a home, which is a long-term decision. And I think that just as some of the clouds clear, as consumers feel better about where the economy is, where their jobs are, where people's businesses are, I think it's going to restore long-term confidence. And I think that we're going to see a quickening of the pace of the recovery of our market.
And where do you see Jawitz Properties in 10 years' time?
Well, I think we're going to continue to grow. I'd like to see us more in Africa, and there are a lot of international brands that have made inroads into South Africa, and I see no reason why we as a South African brand can't make those equivalent inroads into the rest of the world. So that's a long-term view. We've got a lot of growth opportunities still left in South Africa, and obviously, just where the economy is and where the international economy is, now is probably a good time just to bunker down a little bit and be a little more cautious and wait for the right opportunities.
And one last very brief question, I can't resist it.
Yeah.
So that 18,000 rand house in Parktown in 1969, what would it be worth now, you think?
Well, interestingly, it just recently sold for about 3.5 million, if my memory serves me correct. So from 18,969, 42 years, 3.5 million.
How many percentage points is that?
It's a lot of percentage points, with a lot of agent commissions in between and a lot of transfer duty. But the numbers are pretty good. Property is always a long-term view, and that's why it's a barometer of where people
Perhaps
are.
it should be made a historical site in honour of your dad starting
exactly.
there. Thank you very much,
Pleasure.
Herschel Jawitz of Jawitz Properties, for your time. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for this week. Make sure you tune in the same time next week when we give you another story of another successful entrepreneur. For now, from myself, Chris Bishop, it's goodbye.